In this week's edition of From the Dugout with Brad and Roy, we're going to look at some corn and soybeans, and we're going to look at some pretty common questions that we're getting throughout the countryside over the last week, 10 days or so. And that question is, I've got some areas of my field that are really yellow, looks like the corn isn't growing, looks like the soybeans aren't growing, and then I've got other parts of the field where corn's green, it's taken off, is really going to town. And we've got a few different scenarios going on. But the most common scenario that we probably have going on, we're going to look at between these two plants here. So you can see this plant on my right, your left, is a little bit shorter than the plant on my left, in my left hand here. Same hybrid, same field, just a different area of the field. Same planting date, management, everything's the same. But this one on the right, same growth stage, but it's about a foot shorter. And if you saw it out in the field, it's probably about 10 shades of green lighter than this plant here on my left. So let's look at the plant that doesn't look as healthy and try and figure out what's going on. So when we look at this plant, I dug it up, and the first thing I noticed is this root mass goes down and just goes flat out. So you can see this field was hit with a turbo till early on in the spring to get it fit to plant. And you can see those roots go down to that layer and they just stop. And then the other thing that you notice as I turn it to the side here, you can still see this this furrow, and you can see where those openers went through and just smeared it. So this plant came up the same day, same growth stage, just is limited by root development and how far those roots have been able to get out and really get a hold of nutrients. So not only did it suffer early on from some sidewall compaction, it's also suffering from some tillage compaction as well. And when you look at the difference in roots and you look at the difference in color of the soil, you can see why that's the case, right? So this stuff right here, it's a little bit more clay, a little bit lighter in color, wouldn't have been near as dry when it got worked versus this plant right here. And those roots went straight down, got out, and they're finding a lot more nitrogen, finding a lot more nutrients, and being able to pull those nutrients up into the plant. So in this case, what we're seeing is just simply a difference in soil type, seeing a difference in compaction, not only from sidewall compaction, but tillage compaction, and how much area those roots are able to explore and really to be able to pull in nutrients and water. This stuff, it'll eventually catch up, it'll eventually start growing. It's just that these bigger plants, they're in the grain growth stage, they can get as much nitrogen and as much water as they want right now. And so they're simply growing so fast that it's making these smaller plants look like they're standing still and going backwards. In this case, they're not really going backwards, they're just not growing quite as fast. So that's probably the most common thing. The other thing that we're going to see or start to see, we are seeing, is with all the rain that we had in parts of the state, we've lost some nitrogen, no doubt. So there's some denitrification that's going on. We're going to have those poorly drained areas simply start to run out of nitrogen. They're going to start to lack for the crop nutrients. And until they get dried out and either the roots are able to explore more and find more nitrogen, or we can apply more, they're probably just simply going to look kind of rough here for a little bit. And then the other thing that we've got going on, so I don't have any plants here today, but we're going to put some pictures in here in just a second. We have some areas of the state where we were really dry at the end of the growing season last year, and we have some carryover issues. So I've got several calls on FlexStar carryover, and we can look at the pictures here. Very distinctive in the way that FlexStar carryover looks. It has veinal chlorosis, so the veins are starting to rot away. Looks very distinctive. We've got some issues with some FlexStar carryover, not only within the state of Ohio, but some of my counterparts across the Eastern Corn Belt are seeing the same thing. And then we've got a picture here of a field that has some pH issues, and you can see the roots on these plants just aren't quite healthy. They don't look right. It's because we've got some really high pHs and some of the soybean residuals carrying over from last year, digging up this corn crop. So it's not all compaction, but we do have some other instances going on out there that's starting to make our corn crop in some areas look a little bit rough. So get out, dig around, see what you can find. We're going to take a look at some soybean plants here in just a second and see why some of our soybeans just aren't looking up to par. All right, another oddity that we've got going on in corn, something you might find out in some plants, in some fields, you might find some random plants. where the leaves are torn like this. They get that really light color on them. They look a little funny. A lot of times these plants are stunted. We got this plant here on the left that just has all these tillers. This one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This plant has 6 different tillers on it. No real main stem anymore. And this damage is from stink bug. So these plants were actually damaged really early on in the spring. So when this corn was V1, V2, the stink bug crawled down in the whorl, pierced outward through the stalk, and where it pierced outward through the stalk, it pierced through these leaves that were forming, and it injects a toxin. And as that plant starts to grow and those leaves grow up, they actually just rip and tear. Or if they feed on it enough, that plant will just stay stunted, and then we get all these tillers coming out. So a plant like this, unfortunately, will never contribute to yield. It's not going to put an ear on. This guy probably will make it to harvest. He's a little bit behind from the other plants that are in this field, but stink bugs is a pest that occurs early on in the year, and then we don't see the damage until later on during the growing season. So if you start seeing some rips and tears like this, little stink bug got in that plant and damaged it early on. All right, so over the weekend we had some pretty severe storms roll through, especially the west central part of the state, and then some of the southern part of the state. And then here this afternoon, we had some pretty severe storms roll through the northern part of the state. So a common question that we've been getting is on hail damage, and so Bill and I spent some time, drove around, found some hail damage corn. So this is from the storms that went through on Friday night. You can see leaves are pretty tattered, pretty ripped up on these plants here. So when you think about hail and hail damage on corn, pretty similar to what an agronomist is going to tell you on frost. Give it some time. So even if you have hail damage that's more severe than this, the only thing that you can do is really give it time to see how severe the damage is and how quickly that plant is going to respond and grow out of it. So in this case, you can see the whorl of this plant. There's hardly any damage there. It's already started to grow out from the damage that we had on Friday. This plant's going to be fine. It's going to continue to grow, no big issue. The issue that we get to in with hail is if we completely desiccate that plant and it starts to bend over, and then the whorl has a hard time getting out of that dead or decaying tissue. That's really the only time that you're going to have problems with hail on corn that's this big or this size. So if you have some hail damage on corn, give it 4 or 5 days, come out, assess the whorl, assess how much new green tissue is coming out, and you'll be able to tell what the impact is going to be. In this case, zero yield impact, zero impact on this corn at all. Really just cosmetic, ripped up some of the leaves. Give it 4 or 5 days, it'll come out of it and really keep on growing and won't have any yield impact going into fall. Similar to corn, had quite a few questions on hail damage on soybeans. So here's some soybeans that came out of the field just adjacent to the corn plants that we just looked at. You can see we've got some tattered leaves here. They're ripped up. We even have a couple plants where a trifoliate has been removed by hail. But really when it comes to soybeans are pretty resilient when you look at how much defoliation they can take early in the growing season before it really negatively impacts yield. It's quite a bit. In this case, again, no negative impact to yield. Some of these trifoliates, you can see this petiole is damaged. They're probably going to brown and turn and die off because that petiole is completely damaged. That vascular tissue is ruined. But again, that plant's going to continue to grow even if we completely defoliate this plant. Behind every node, there's an axillary bud, and those things will kick on and start to grow. So soybeans are really resilient. Unless you have plants that are completely broken off below where the cotyledons are and are completely dead, then you're going to lose a plant. You're going to lose nodes per acre. But for the majority of the soybeans, again, just like corn, give it 4 or 5 days, give it some time, see how much new growth is coming out, and you'll be able to assess the hail damage better from that point on. So soybeans, a lot more resilient. We'll just give it some time and come back and look at some of this stuff later.